I'm Lila Bennett, 34, and if I'm being honest, I was never supposed to shine. Not too bright, not too loud, just helpful enough to hold the family together. At least, that's how they liked it. At my rehearsal dinner, under strings of fairy lights and gentle jazz, everyone toasted to how much I give, how patient, how generous, how I always put family first. Everyone, except Ivy. She sat there, her wine glass untouched, her lips pursed in that familiar half-smirk. When my dad made a toast about how I saved the family during Mom's surgery, Ivy looked away. When my aunt recounted how I paid off Ivy's credit card debt without making a big deal, she rolled her eyes. But when it was her turn to speak, silence. Just silence. And it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, his touch grounding me. He knew this wasn't just a wedding. It was my chance to start clean. A reset. After years of keeping the peace, sacrificing vacations, stepping up when no one else would, this was supposed to be my beginning. Our beginning. I smiled through the clink of glasses and hugs from relatives I barely knew, but inside, I was checking every corner for Ivy's next move. I'd clung to Daniel's gift earlier that day like it was armor. A gold bracelet with a sapphire clasp, understated but expensive, the kind that says, "I see you." That morning, as we got ready for the rehearsal dinner, he fastened it on my wrist himself. "No more invisible," he said. "Promise me." I promised. But Ivy, she was always the exception to every rule. The one who could break things and have everyone clean up after her. The one who could show up late, drunk, or not at all, and somehow still be the center of attention. I didn't expect her to throw confetti at my engagement. But I thought, maybe, just maybe, she'd be happy for me. Or at least pretend. Apparently, that was too much. After the dinner, I stood in the mirror of our hotel room, brushing out my hair. I could hear Daniel on the phone with his mom, laughing about his uncle's failed attempt at karaoke. Behind the laughter, though, I felt it. The knot forming in my chest. That ivy-shaped space in my life tightening like a fist. "You okay?" Daniel asked when he came into the room. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and looked at me in the mirror. "You know you don't have to be anything for anyone tomorrow. It's your day, no one else's." I nodded. I know. But I didn't. Not really. Because deep down, I still wanted something I was never going to get. Ivy's blessing. Her approval. Her love. Her love. The next morning, I'd wake up to sabotage dressed as inconvenience, to whispers cloaked in tradition, and to a betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family. But that night, under soft lamplight and the warmth of Daniel's arms, I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe I could finally be the main character in my own story. I used to think sacrifice was noble, that giving up your needs for the sake of family meant you were good, kind, maybe even worthy. But all it really got me was invisible. I was 14 when Ivy crashed her first car, a beat-up Volvo that my parents co-signed. I was the one who gave up my summer babysitting job to help pay the insurance deductible. No one asked me to, I just did it. Ivy cried for a week, blamed her breakup with some boy named Marcus, and Mom said, "She's just fragile, Lila. You know how she is." She was always just something. Just tired. Just stressed. Just going through a lot. And I was just dependable. I learned young that dependable meant silent. That if I brought up how Ivy never helped clean the house or how she borrowed my clothes without asking, I was being too sensitive. So I stopped talking. I just cleaned. I just paid. I just waited for someone to notice. They didn't. After college, when Ivy racked up $6,000 in credit card debt trying to find herself in LA, I drained my emergency fund to help her. I told her it was a loan. She told me I was a lifesaver. That was 5 years ago. She's never mentioned it again. When Mom had hip surgery 2 years back, I was the one who took 2 weeks off work to care for her. I made smoothies and changed dressings and watched reruns of Murder, She Wrote on low volume while she dozed. Ivy flew in for a weekend, posted a picture on Instagram of the hospital flowers, and left a comment under it that said, "Family first, Thai." No one knew I was sleeping on a futon in the guest room, crying quietly into my phone after Mom snapped at me for making soup too salty. No one knew how it felt to watch Ivy get praised for showing up while I was being resented for staying. "That's just how siblings are," Daniel said once, back when we first started dating, and I told him a story about Ivy accidentally missing my birthday brunch. "There's always one who takes more and one who gives more." I smiled, but I wanted to scream. Because Ivy never just took. She extracted. She carved pieces out of me and called it love. And I let her. When I told Daniel about the wedding venue, about the converted barn with string lights and lavender fields, he kissed my forehead and said, "Finally, something just for you." But was it? Ivy was my maid of honor. Not because I wanted her to be. Because Mom said it would mean a lot to her. So I smiled and nodded and handed over one more piece. "You really think she'll behave?" Daniel had asked, only half joking. I shrugged. "She'll show up. She always shows up." But that wasn't the truth. Ivy never showed up. Not for me. She showed up for spectacle. For the spotlight. For the chance to remind me, in her sly little ways, that she would always be the one people looked at. And I would be the one holding the spotlight steady. Until now. Or at least, that's what I thought. The morning of the wedding was supposed to feel magical. Quiet. Sacred. But I woke up to chaos in a silk robe and a mouth full of dread. First text I saw was from my makeup artist. "Stomach flu, can't make it, so sorry." Replacement? Ivy's friend Kenzie. A girl I hadn't seen since Ivy's 21st birthday, who once got drunk and told me my face shape was better for contour than photos. Daniel offered to handle breakfast and keep things light with the groomsmen. I kissed him, told him I was fine. I wasn't. But he knew. He always knew. Kenzie showed up late, chewing gum and wearing glitter eyeliner at 8 a.m. "I brought my own kit," she chirped, dropping her bag on the counter like she lived here. "Don't worry, I know what works on a classic face like yours." Classic. As in basic. I sat in the chair, watching my reflection disappear under layers I didn't ask for. The blush too harsh, the lashes too long. Ivy breezed in with a Starbucks cup and zero apology. "Don't panic, Lyles. You look bridal. Kind of Sofia Vergara meets a Stepford wife." I blinked at her in the mirror. "You changed your speech slot?" She sipped her drink. "Yeah. I'm going right after the cake cutting now. More emotional impact." I should have said something. Should have put my foot down. But that old reflex kicked in. Don't make waves, don't ruin the mood. So I nodded, like I always do, and smiled like my cheeks weren't already aching from pretending. My earrings went missing next. The antique pearl studs from Daniel's grandmother. Gone. Ivy claimed she saw them in the dressing tray. Kenzie said maybe I misplaced them. And somehow, that became the truth everyone accepted. I felt myself fracturing. Not loudly. Quietly. The way a glacier does. Silently cracking beneath its surface until one day, it just disappears. By the time we made it to the barn, guests were arriving in pastel linen and smiles. My aunt gushed about the dried flower centerpieces. My cousin cried when she saw me in the dress. And I felt like a ghost floating through a party thrown for someone else. Daniel's eyes met mine just before the ceremony. Steady, loving, anchoring. He whispered, "No one gets to ruin this for you." I believed him. And for a while, they didn't. The vows were perfect. His voice only cracked once, when he said, "You've held everyone else together for so long. Let me be the one who holds you now." People teared up. My dad dabbed his eyes. Even the florist sniffled behind a row of baby's breath. I said my vows with a voice stronger than I expected, and for a brief, shimmering second, I believed I'd outrun the shadows. Until the applause faded. Until Ivy reappeared, champagne in hand, heading straight for the mic. Ivy wasn't supposed to speak yet, not until after the cake. That was the plan. But plans were never Ivy's strong suit. Control was. She stood under the hanging lanterns with her glass raised like she owned the air between us. Her dress was too tight, too sparkly, too Ivy. And that smirk. That familiar little curve that meant nothing good was coming. It was already curling on her lips. I froze at our table, Daniel's hand tightening around mine. He whispered, "Want me to stop her?" But I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. All I could do was watch the wreck unfold. "I just want to say a few words," Ivy began, her voice all sweetness dipped in arsenic. "To my sister, the perfect bride." Laughter rippled through the crowd. She let it sit there a second too long. "I'm not great at speeches," she went on, "but I figured now's the time for honesty. Real honesty. You know, before the champagne really hits." I caught Mom in the corner, eyes wide, mouthing something to Dad. Daniel leaned forward, ready to intercept, but I shook my head. If she was going to do it, let her. I was done pretending. "When we were kids, Lila was always the favorite," Ivy continued, pacing now like a stand-up comic testing a bit. "The smart one, the helpful one, the golden girl. I was just the mess." Some polite murmurs, a few uncomfortable chuckles. I felt my stomach curdle. "But you know what no one ever talks about?" Her voice dropped. "How exhausting it is to be around someone who's always right. Always giving. Always so perfect." Daniel shifted beside me. My heart thudded in my ears. And here she is today, with her fairy tale wedding and her perfect groom, wearing all this bling like she didn't grow up telling me we couldn't afford brand cereal. More laughter. Uneasy this time. I stared at the bracelet on my wrist, the one Daniel gave me. The one Ivy couldn't stop glancing at during the rehearsal dinner. Ivy reached into her clutch, dramatically, like it was theater, and pulled something out. "I almost forgot," she said with a sly grin. "I found this in the bridal suite earlier." My bracelet. No. Not a copy. Not a duplicate. My bracelet. She held it up between two fingers like it was evidence. "Some people have it all," she said slowly, turning to the crowd. "And still take more." Gasps. Actual gasps. A few people clapped awkwardly, thinking maybe this was a joke. Others just stared at me. My cheeks burned. My breath caught. Daniel stood. "That's enough," he said, voice low but sharp. But Ivy just smiled, shrugged, and dropped the bracelet onto the tablecloth like a mic she didn't care to keep. And in that moment, as the silence spread through the barn like smoke, I realized something I had known for years but never said out loud. My sister didn't just want to hurt me, she wanted everyone to watch. I didn't cry. Not right away. I stood there at our sweetheart table, surrounded by the stunned faces of friends and relatives, the same people who had just cheered my vows, and all I could think was, she did it again. She turned my moment into hers, my joy into a spectacle. Daniel tried to speak, tried to pull me back to the present, but his voice sounded far away, like it was underwater. I couldn't hear him. I couldn't hear anything except Ivy's last words echoing through my chest. "Some people have it all, and still take more." That line, it didn't just sting. It sliced. I turned, calmly, methodically, and walked out the side door of the barn, past the dessert table, past the DJ pretending to scroll through his playlist, past the aunt who whispered, "Is she okay?" As if I were some animal startled by thunder. The field behind the venue was empty, just golden grass and sky. I walked until the voices faded, until I could breathe again. I sat in the middle of it, dress pooling around me like fog. The wind picked up, catching my veil, tugging it gently toward nowhere. For the first time that day, I let my hands shake. This was supposed to be my fresh start. My clean slate. The one day where no one could question whether I belonged or if I mattered. I had written vows promising a future free of dysfunction. I had spent months choosing vendors and colors and playlists, trying to manifest peace. But peace doesn't grow where poison has been planted. And Ivy, she'd been sowing it in the soil of our family since we were kids. Always subtle, always just enough to get away with. But tonight wasn't subtle. Tonight was a performance. A final act. I pulled Daniel's envelope from my dress pocket. He'd slipped it to me that morning. "Open it when it gets overwhelming," he'd said with a wink. I hadn't thought I'd need it. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Lila, you've spent your whole life being strong for everyone else. But today, I want to be strong for you. I see you. I know the battles you fight in silence, the way you carry your family like it's your job. But love isn't a job, sweetheart. It's a choice. And I choose you. Not just for the perfect days, but for the messy ones. For the ones where your sister tries to ruin everything and you wonder if maybe you deserved it. You didn't. You don't. You never will. Let this be the day you choose peace, too. Let this be the day you finally stop asking for a seat at the table and build your own damn table. I'll be there. Always. D. I clutched the letter like it could anchor me. And then I whispered into the wind. Not to Ivy, not to the guests, not to anyone but myself. Let's go. I stood up, brushed the grass from my gown, and walked back toward the barn. Not to fix anything. Just to leave. The barn was quieter when I stepped back inside. Not silent? No. The silence had already broken like glass under Ivy's heel. But quieter, like everyone was waiting to see what I'd do next. Some guests had returned to their wine. Others clutched their phones, pretending to text while sneaking glances at me. I ignored them. Daniel was by the bar, his jaw tight, shoulders squared like a man ready to defend something sacred. Me. He looked up the moment he saw me, his eyes scanning my face like he was searching for bruises. Emotional ones. You okay? He asked, stepping forward, his hand instinctively finding mine. No, I said, but I know what I want. He nodded once, not asking questions. Just holding on. We didn't make an announcement, we didn't call attention. We just walked, hand in hand, through the crowd of our own wedding reception, like ghosts slipping out of a party that no longer belonged to us. I passed by the cake table, where the three-tiered lemon buttercream stood untouched, a tiny version of us smiling from the top. I passed the flower wall Ivy had insisted we didn't need, and then made sure was placed beside her table. As we neared the exit, I caught a flash of Mom's face, panic, confusion, the beginning of damage control setting in. I heard her call my name, sharp and urgent. But I didn't stop. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. Daniel helped me into the passenger seat of the vintage convertible his uncle had loaned us. I didn't even glance back at the barn. As we drove away, the venue lights faded in the rearview mirror, shrinking until they disappeared entirely. 10 minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of the Airbnb, a quiet cottage tucked behind a vineyard, where we were supposed to spend our wedding night. Daniel didn't say anything. He just opened my door, helped me out, and walked me inside like I was something breakable. But not broken. The place smelled like lavender and old wood. The lights were soft. A bottle of champagne waited on ice, but I couldn't drink. Not yet. He took off his jacket, draped it over a chair, and turned to me. Do you want me to talk, or do you want to be quiet? Neither, I said. And then I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. When he finished, he folded it once and placed it carefully on the nightstand. Then he looked at me. Really looked. Lila, he said. This is still our wedding. Maybe not the one we planned, but it's still ours. Let's make it count. I nodded. Okay. We stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then, without the music, without the guests, without the weight of anything we were supposed to be, Daniel slid the ring from his pocket, the real one, and held it out. Marry me again, he whispered. This time, just for us. And I did. Barefoot, tear-streaked, in a rented cottage we hadn't even decorated, I said, I do, again. And for the first time all day, I meant it without looking over my shoulder. We woke up tangled in linen sheets, sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains, the vineyard outside swaying gently in the breeze like it had no idea what had happened the night before. And maybe it didn't. Maybe the world hadn't cracked open like it had in my chest. My phone was still off. I knew what was waiting when I turned it back on. Apologies wrapped in excuses, concern masquerading as control, Ivy spinning a new narrative where she was misunderstood, overwhelmed, emotional. But not wrong. Daniel rolled over and kissed my shoulder. You ready to check in with the circus? I stared at the ceiling. Not yet. He nodded. Then we won't. But a few hours later, curiosity, or maybe masochism, won. I turned it on. 27 voicemails. 63 texts. A flurry of group chats renamed things like wedding debrief and family talk, no drama. The first was from Mom, call me immediately. Then Ivy, I think we need to talk. Then my Aunt Melanie, I can't believe what happened. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Daniel sat beside me while I scrolled. I didn't play the voicemails. I didn't need to. I knew the tone. Ivy crying. Mom panicked. Dad probably quiet and confused. There was one message I didn't expect though, from my cousin Laura. She wrote, Daniel's letter. Wow. He shared it with us after you left. I just wanted to say, I see you now. Really see you. My breath caught. I clicked on the thread. Photos. Of the letter. Passed hand to hand like gospel in a room where silence had festered for too long. A text from another cousin followed. We've been blind for years. I'm so sorry. Then another. I remember when you paid for Ivy's deposit. She told everyone it was her bonus. And another. Lila, I never knew. I just thought you liked being the fixer. I didn't realize you were never allowed to stop. It kept going. Not a flood, but a ripple. A slow awakening in a family that had learned to treat my boundaries as optional. I looked up at Daniel. You shared it? He shrugged. They needed to read it. Not for drama, for truth. I sat with that for a long time. What it meant for someone to see you not just as useful, but as whole. Not just generous, but deserving. That night, we didn't go back to the barn. We didn't answer every message. We lit the fireplace. We ordered room service. We danced in our pajamas to a playlist we made during our first month of dating. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying anyone. Just holding on. To peace. To Daniel. To me. The messages didn't stop. By morning, my phone felt like a tiny bomb pulsing on the nightstand, vibrating with every new apology, every, can we talk? Every attempt to rewrite what had happened in that barn under fairy lights. Ivy's first text was 5 paragraphs long. I don't know what came over me. I was overwhelmed. Emotional. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. It just did. She didn't say sorry. Not really. Then came the second. You embarrassed me by walking out. I thought we were closer than that. Closer? As in proximity? Because we shared DNA and trauma? I didn't answer. I didn't even read the third. Daniel brought me coffee on the porch of the Airbnb, our rings glinting in the sunlight as he handed me the mug. How bad is it? He asked. I scrolled, sipping slowly. Ivy wants to meet. Says we need to talk like adults. Do you want to? I shook my head. I don't want to explain my boundaries. I want them respected. He nodded. Then don't meet. It sounded so simple. Like breathing. Like waking up and choosing peace instead of people-pleasing. So, I didn't meet her. I didn't call my mom back either, even when she texted, we're all hurting. That includes Ivy. Think about your part in this. My part? I blocked Ivy. Then I opened a new text addressed to Mom and Dad together. I kept it short. We're taking space. This was never just about a bracelet. Please don't contact us until you're ready to talk with honesty, not guilt. I hit send. My hands didn't shake. Later that day, Daniel drove us through winding back roads to a little vineyard he found online. Just the two of us, no guests, no timeline, no expectation. He held my hand across the table and said, You didn't do anything wrong. I looked down at my wineglass, watching the sunlight catch in the red. I know, I whispered, but hearing it out loud, from him, from someone who didn't want anything from me, made it feel real. That night, as I soaked in the clawfoot tub, I thought about all the times I'd been told I was too sensitive, too giving, too much. And now, finally, I realized. I'm not too much. I was just in rooms too small. And I wasn't going back. The first thing I noticed when we returned home wasn't what had changed, it was what hadn't. The same framed photo of my family still sat on the bookshelf by the door. Ivy in the center, her smile wide, one arm looped possessively around my shoulder like we were best friends instead of barely tolerable sisters. That picture used to sting. Now it just felt like fiction. I took it down and placed it in a drawer. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. but I didn't want it looking at me either. Daniel put the suitcase by the couch and reached into his jacket pocket. "Found this in your wedding bag," he said, handing me the bracelet. The sapphire one. It felt heavier now. "Keep it?" he asked. I held it in my palm for a long second. "Yeah," I said quietly. "But I'm not wearing it again. Not until it means something new." He nodded. No questions. Just understanding. That's what love looks like when it's quiet. It listens even when words don't come easy. Later that night, I checked my email, just to clear notifications, and found one from my cousin Mara. She'd attached a screenshot. Daniel's letter. I blinked, confused. Then I read the caption. Mara shared this with me. "I think you should see how many people are talking about it. People are finally seeing her clearly." Below it was a flurry of texts from extended family. Ivy's name kept coming up. Phrases like, "finally makes sense," and "I didn't know the half of it," and "I remember when Lila gave up her graduation trip because Ivy crashed her car." I stared at the screen, the truth unspooling in real time. The family was dividing, not in a loud, dramatic way. In the quiet, revealing kind of way. In the way where people start remembering things differently. Or maybe just remembering them honestly for the first time. One message from a second cousin I barely knew read, "I always thought Ivy's behavior was weird. I just didn't think I was allowed to say it out loud." That was the thing about family dynamics. They wrought in silence. Daniel came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. "You okay?" I leaned back into his chest. "I think I'm being believed. For the first time." He kissed the top of my head. "That's how it starts." The shift wasn't loud, but it was happening. And for once, I wasn't the one trying to make everyone see. They were looking on their own. Back at my parents' house, the fallout was unfolding like slow-motion shrapnel. I didn't witness it directly. I didn't have to. The messages told me everything. "Apparently," Ivy cried. "A lot." Claimed she didn't mean it like that. Said I was being overly sensitive, that I ruined my own wedding by walking out. She spun it like I'd stolen the moment from her, not the other way around. But something shifted. Because this time, people didn't rush to console her. Some cousins stood up. A few aunts. Even Dad, quiet, steady Dad, apparently told her. "That wasn't your moment to take." When I read that in a text from my cousin Melanie, I had to reread it 3 times. Because my father, the king of neutrality, the man who once said, "Let's not take sides," had taken a side. Mine. But not everyone rallied. My mother, for one, called Ivy's speech unfortunate, like it was a weather event. A blip. Her main concern seemed to be how it made the family look, how the whispers were circulating, how people were saying words like toxic and manipulative. It wasn't about truth for her, it was about optics. But Daniel's parents, they were a different story. They came by unannounced one evening, arms full of takeout and warm smiles. "We thought you might be sick of your own thoughts," his mom said, wrapping me in a hug before I could answer the door. Over dinner, Daniel's dad raised a toast. To choosing peace, even when it makes noise. I didn't cry. Not until later, when we were clearing plates and his mom said, "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Some people think love means enduring. But sometimes, it means leaving." That night, Daniel and I sat on the floor of our living room, barefoot and tired and still not quite believing how far the earthquake had reached. "We skipped our own reception," I whispered, leaning into his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. "But we didn't miss the beginning." Because that's what it felt like now. Not an ending. A beginning. Of something smaller. Kinder. Realer. I didn't need everyone to approve anymore. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy for wanting more than survival. I wanted joy. I wanted rest. And in the middle of the ruins Ivy left behind, I was finally building something that might just hold. We didn't plan a second ceremony. There was no Pinterest board, no caterers, no DJ with a must playlist. Just us, a dusty ring box, and a friend of Daniel's who happened to be ordained. The Airbnb host, a retired schoolteacher named Elaine, offered her garden after hearing what happened. "You don't need an audience," she said gently. "Just a place that feels like a beginning." So, on a Tuesday afternoon, barefoot on damp grass with my hair still drying from a shower, I married Daniel again. He wore rolled up sleeves and a wristwatch older than us both. I wore a sundress I bought in college and forgot I loved. And our dog, Clover, sat in the front row wagging like it was her job to witness joy. Daniel took my hands. Not the performative way. The real way. The way people hold on when they're afraid and in love and finally safe. I didn't know I could love someone this much, he said, voice cracking. Not just because you're strong, but because you let me see where it hurts. I didn't cry when Ivy dragged my bracelet across that reception table. I didn't cry when my mother said I was overreacting, or when my childhood was picked apart like someone else's scrapbook. But I cried then. Because for the first time, someone wasn't thanking me for being resilient. He was loving me for being real. When it was my turn, I said, "You're the first person who didn't ask me to be less so they could love me more." He slipped the ring back on my finger. No audience. No applause. Just the rustling of leaves and the sound of Clover's collar jingling. Elaine brought out sparkling cider and cupcakes afterward. We ate them on the back steps, talking about nothing and everything. The light stretched long over the vineyard. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. No more saving seats at tables where I wasn't wanted. No more shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Just me. Just Daniel. Just this quiet vow beneath a blooming arch of roses that from now on, love would feel like safety, not sacrifice. The next morning, I did the thing I'd been avoiding. I opened my messages. Not Ivy's, not Mom's. Those were still blocked, muted, quarantined like toxic waste. But I needed to know what had landed in the wake of our quiet exit. There were texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins I barely remembered. College friends who saw snippets on social media and reached out with cautious kindness. One from my Uncle Paul just read, "Proud of you, kid. Took guts to walk away." Another from Aunt Valerie, "Never liked how Ivy treated you. I just didn't know how to say it before." That was the theme, apparently. People suddenly remembering their spines. Or maybe just seeing clearly now that I had stopped standing in Ivy's shadow, holding up her weight like it was my job. I didn't respond to most. I didn't need to. The validation was sweet, sure. But I wasn't building a new life to collect applause. Still, one message hit differently. My dad. "I miss you, sweetheart. I wish I had spoken up sooner. You didn't deserve what happened. I'm trying to understand. I love you." It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't nothing. I stared at that message for a long time. Not sure what to do with it. He hadn't protected me. Not from Ivy, not from Mom's silent approval of her cruelty. But he wasn't trying to excuse it either. Later that day, Daniel caught me rereading it. "You can respond," he said gently, "and still have boundaries." So I did. "I love you too. But I need time. Please respect that." He didn't reply right away. But when he did, it was short and clean. "I will." That night, as I curled into bed, the silence on my phone felt different. Not like rejection. Like control. Like peace. And I realized something. Walking away didn't burn the bridge. It lit a path. One I was finally ready to walk. It started as a whisper. Daniel's letter, passed quietly to my cousin Laura, then to Mara, then to a circle of relatives who had always kept their thoughts tucked behind, pursed lips and polite nods. But this time, something shifted. The letter didn't stay secret. It found its way to group chats, email threads, even the Facebook message inbox of my aunt in Florida, who hadn't attended the wedding, but suddenly had a lot to say. She gave, and none of us saw her bleeding. That line was quoted like scripture. For years, I'd been the glue. But no one asked what it cost to hold the cracks together. Until Daniel put it on paper. One cousin texted me, "Ivy said you were dramatic." But that letter? That felt like truth. Another wrote, "Remember when you gave up your NYC internship because Ivy needed a place to stay? I didn't know the whole story. I'm sorry." It kept coming. Ripple after ripple, not loud, but unrelenting. Even Mom, I was told, couldn't ignore it. Someone forwarded the letter to her. Not out of spite, out of hope, maybe, that she might see what she'd refused to acknowledge, that her easiest daughter had been quietly drowning while she clapped for Ivy's every cannonball. But I didn't wait for her reaction. I wasn't holding my breath for an apology stitched in shame. This wasn't about them anymore. Daniel and I went to brunch that morning, just the two of us. The hostess complimented my dress. The waiter joked with us about mimosa refills. I laughed. Full belly, full heart. And in the middle of that laughter I realized I felt light. Not because people finally saw me, but because I'd stopped begging to be seen. Let the whispers swirl. Let the truth echo. Let the letter do what it needed to do. I had already said goodbye to the girl who needed a witness to her pain, and hello to the woman who had nothing left to prove. We didn't throw another party, we hosted a brunch. Not a statement. Not a replacement. Just a quiet meal with the few people who had always seen me, even when I was buried under the title of the good one. Lara came. Mara brought cinnamon rolls. Daniel made pancakes that were slightly burned on one side, but nobody cared. My favorite aunt, Ruth, showed up in leggings and a sweatshirt that said, "I speak fluent sarcasm." No mimosas, no speeches, no fake smiles. Just laughter. The real kind, the kind that didn't sting. We sat around our small dining table, plates stacked with eggs and jam and everything warm. No one asked about Ivy. No one tiptoed around what had happened. At one point, Mara clinked her mug gently with a spoon and said, "I know this wasn't the wedding day you imagined." I looked around the table. The mess of crumbs, the dog asleep under Daniel's chair, the mismatched mugs, the open window letting in late summer air. "No," I said. "It was better. Because this felt like family. No performance, no tiptoeing through tension. Just presence." We passed stories like syrup. About childhood road trips, Daniel's high school phase with frosted tips, my disastrous attempts at cooking growing up. We laughed until we were red-faced and breathless. At one point, Daniel slipped his hand into mine under the table and whispered, "This. This is what we get to build." And he was right. After everyone left and the table was still covered in sticky plates and paper napkins with notes scribbled in the margins, I didn't rush to clean. I just stood in the middle of it all, the chaos, the sweetness, the quiet miracle of being known without having to perform, and felt full. This wasn't about a grand finale. It was about small, honest beginnings, ones I got to choose. The shift wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no shouting matches. Just a slow, steady unraveling of the old patterns I'd spent my entire life knotted inside. I stopped replying to texts that made me shrink. I stopped answering calls that came with guilt stitched between every word. I stopped pretending. I went low contact. My mother didn't take it well. Her first response was a group message with every emotionally manipulative line she'd ever practiced. "You're abandoning your family. Don't let one bad moment erase years of love. This isn't who we raised you to be." That last one almost made me laugh. Because she was right. This isn't who they raised me to be. They raised me to be quiet, accommodating, invisible. But Daniel stood beside me when I blocked her number. Not forever. Just for now. Just long enough to hear my own voice without hers talking over it. Dad reached out once more. Said he understood. That he missed me, but he got it. That maybe it was time for everyone to learn some new ways of being family. As for Ivy, I haven't heard from her. Not directly. But I heard she started therapy. That knowledge landed strangely. Not as hope, not exactly. Just peace. Her healing was her business now. Not my job, not my cross to carry. I didn't reach out. I didn't write back. Not because I'm cruel, because I'm done setting myself on fire just to keep her warm. My world got smaller, but it also got softer. Simpler. Daniel and I started walking together every morning. No phones. Just coffee and silence and the sound of two people building something real. One day, on our walk, he said, "You're different lately." "Better or worse?" I asked. "Just more you," he said. Like the noise finally stopped. And he was right. The noise had stopped. And in the quiet, I could finally hear myself say, I'm still here, and I'm not going back. It started with a single email. A former client I hadn't worked with in years, reaching out with a simple request: would you be open to consulting again? I stared at it for a long moment. Before the wedding, before Ivy's toast, before I stopped bending myself into silence, I might have hesitated. I would have wondered if it was too much, if I was capable, if I could handle the risk. But now? Now, I clicked reply. Yes, let's talk. That one project turned into 3. Then 6. Within months, Daniel and I had set up our own boutique firm, not a startup hustled into existence, but a quiet, deliberate creation. We called it Bridge and Lantern. He thought of the name. He said it reminded him of what we'd built together: connection and light. We focused on emotional intelligence in leadership, empathy in corporate culture, human-first strategy. Because that was the real story, wasn't it? This wasn't just about family. It was about all the spaces where people were taught to ignore what they feel in favor of what looks good. All the rooms where kindness gets labeled weakness and survival masquerades as strength. We wanted to do things differently. The work was slow at first, then steady, then something we could actually live on. Daniel handled operations. I led strategy and coaching, and together, we created something from the very ashes of what nearly broke us. Sometimes I'd finish a session with a client, a woman crying in her office because she finally set a boundary with her CEO. And I'd walk into the kitchen and say to Daniel, we're not just surviving. We're teaching it now. And he'd nod like that was exactly what he'd hoped for. This wasn't the plan we made on napkins at midnight during our engagement. It wasn't the dream we started with. But it was better. Because it was built on truth. And this time, I wasn't holding it together for anyone else. This time, I was just holding myself. Thanksgiving looked different. There were no 20-person tables. No long-winded speeches from relatives who barely knew our middle names. No performance of togetherness for the sake of optics, just 6 of us. Daniel, me, Ruth, Laura, Mara, and our neighbor Jude, who'd just gone through a breakup and brought a pie so sweet it made us all cry. We didn't say grace, we said truths. Like, I'm glad you're here. And, I didn't know I needed this. We passed dishes hand to hand, buttery rolls, roasted vegetables, a turkey we nearly burned because we got too caught up telling stories. No one complained. No one raised their voice. And no one talked about Ivy. She wasn't there. Neither was my mother. And for the first time in my life, their absence didn't feel like failure. It felt like pruning. Not punishment. Not revenge. Just letting go of the branches that no longer bore fruit. Daniel caught me watching everyone during dessert, my fork hovering over a slice of pumpkin pie I didn't remember plating. What are you thinking? He asked. That I used to be terrified of holidays, I said. The pretending. The tiptoeing. The exhaustion of acting like everything was fine. And now? I looked around. At the messy table, the open laughter, the way Ruth had her feet tucked under her chair like she was home. Now, I said, I think this is what it means to be fed. Not just with food. With ease. With belonging. With enough. We didn't take a family photo. We didn't send out cards. But Mara snapped a candid of Daniel handing me coffee the next morning, still in pajamas, both of us bleary-eyed and soft. She sent it with a caption, the tree looks smaller. But the fruit? Sweeter than ever. And she was right. Not everything that falls away is a loss. Sometimes, it's space. For better things to grow. A year later, I stood in my own kitchen, barefoot on the tile, the smell of rosemary and roasted garlic curling through the air like a promise. This dinner wasn't for show. There were no seating charts. No matching linen napkins or centerpieces coordinated by color palettes. Just a long wooden table, a playlist humming in the background, and people I had chosen, not inherited. Daniel brought in a tray of fresh bread, still warm. Our dog trailed behind him, tail wagging. Ruth was already pouring wine. Jude brought his new girlfriend, who laughed with her whole body. Lara and Mara were bickering over which dessert to try first. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a full circle. Someone knocked gently just before we served. Daniel opened the door. It was a courier, a small envelope in his hand. "For Lila," he said, "from Ivy." Daniel raised an eyebrow as he handed it to me but didn't say a word. I opened it at the sink, quietly, away from the table. Inside was a card. No flowers, no glitter, just ink. "I'm working on it. I know that's not enough, but I'm working on it. Ivy." I stared at the words for a long time. Not an apology. Not exactly. But not a weapon either. Just human. I didn't bring the card back to the table. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't let it shift the energy in the room. Because healing isn't about folding everyone back into your life. Sometimes it's just about forgiving them from a distance. Later, after plates were cleared and laughter lingered like perfume, I looked around and saw something I hadn't recognized before. Peace. Not the absence of pain. The presence of protection. Of intention. Of love that doesn't hurt to hold. Daniel slipped his hand into mine. "You okay?" I nodded. Better than okay. This wasn't the life I planned. It was better. Smaller, softer, rooted in truth. And as I looked around the table, I finally understood. Sometimes, love means leaving the table, until you can choose who's seated at yours.